I am Politico's Chief Tech Correspondent. Thank you so much for joining us, both in person and online. This is our final session, so hopefully we'll make it as interactive as possible. Please send me your questions via Swapcard. I think you've probably heard how to do this already, but those in the audience, you can use the app. If you're online, please go to either I think it's the right-hand side on desktop, below you on mobile, depending on where you are, and please send me all your questions for the topic. So it's a quite broad one we're getting into. So it's to regulate or not to regulate, an uphill battle to get tech standards in line. We have a wonderful panel to talk about this. I'm going to start left to right, if that's okay. So Thibaut is from the European Commission. We've got Louise from the UK's FCDO, and then Dieter is from the Danish government as the Deputy Tech Ambassador. There's a lot to cover, and we have counting down 33 minutes. Part of this discussion is about how, like it or not, digital tech has become part of the global discussion. It's quite fitting that we have the G7 Ministerial for Digital and Tech Ministers happening in a couple of days, just outside of Tokyo. So, you know, it's a live discussion. But sometimes it's better to take a step back and sort of put this into some context, because we can get into the minutiae of AI standards and sort of telecom coordination and things like that. But part of this, Dieter, the Danes kind of got this ball rolling in terms of digital diplomacy back in the day, and many countries have followed. But in terms of looking specifically at sort of where you and the Danes fit this in terms of the digital diplomacy component, how important is this work now to sort of the broader international discussion?
Well, here you have focused very much on regulation, and another day, another new EU regulation, and this is really of immense importance that we need to govern the digital transformation. But with what is also very important for us, and has been since 2017, where we established a tech diplomacy in Denmark, in the MFA, with presence in Silicon Valley and in Copenhagen, is really also the dialogue with the big tech industry. And that's where we started, because we saw the immense impact it has on our societies, our private lives, but also on the foreign policy. And just to be very concrete, now you have talked about the DSA and the DMA, and some of these discussions we have with the tech industry is really to say, now we have this regulation. It's not the ceiling. It's the floor, it's the baseline for common responsible technological development. So these are these type of dialogues we are having directly with the tech industry in Silicon Valley. But also to say that, you know, regulation cannot stand alone. We are facing a new geopolitical reality. We have a war in Ukraine. We have increased rivalry between the EUUS and China on new and emerging technologies. We see decoupling, vulnerabilities in our supply chains, as we have experienced very concretely in semiconductors. Maybe that's the most concrete. So we also have to understand that for us in Europe to be a player, we cannot only be the referee. Because these new technologies, they impact hard power, its economy, its security, and it impacts soft power, our values, our culture. So this is why it's very important for us also to have very much focus, how can we strengthen EU when it comes to innovation, but also, of course, in our external relations. And we were very, very pleased last summer, where we had the council conclusions, our foreign ministers coming together to really prioritize our external side of this, conclusions on digital diplomacy in the EU, which is really forming a very broad strategic baseline for us for the coming years to take all the policies, the strategies, the principles we have been working so hard for in the EU, inside EU, and use them much more proactively, coordinated in our external relations. It goes for, and it's not only words, it's multilateral, but bilateral, but it's really also through, for example, the Global Gateway, the digital partnerships, and the TTC, of course, also.
The EU-US Trade and Tech Council, we should...
Yeah, with the US,
Yeah.
which was started in 2021, I think,
Yeah.
and now we're coming up with India. These are the really important conversations we need to have to work for a responsible, secure technological development based on human rights and democracy. So just maybe for a start.
No, so it's a good start. Louise, I want to come to the British perspective on this because, again, I've gone about 5 minutes without mentioning Brexit, so no longer in the EU, but part of Europe. There are very like-minded principles that London is trying to also propagate via its own sort of digital diplomacy strategy. And we also had an international tech strategy, I think last month, I think it was published. Where, from your perspective, where does the UK fit in this? There are a lot of like-minded actions going on with both, EU partners as well as other Western democratic partners, but there's obviously now potentially more freedom for the Brits to pursue their own goals and aspirations.
Indeed. So thanks very much for having me here, Louise Thomas from the International Tech team in the Foreign Office, and very much support all the words from Dita. Her team came up with the English word techplomacy before we'd even thought about it. So we're very much following in the Danes' footsteps in thinking about, as you said, all the intersection between the geopolitics of our day, how we engage industry in these conversations and so on. And as Mark pointed out, we launched our international tech strategy across UK government strategy last month, and that sets out how we want to see tech develop in line with our principles, and we've established our principles as being open, resilient, open, responsible, secure and resilient, and we talk in the strategy about how we want to see all of the areas of emerging technology develop in line with those principles. So bedtime reading, please find it on our website or come and talk to me afterwards. On the international picture, so quite right on G7. G7 has got a great role to play here in our presidency. We established the Future Tech Forum, which, with a few changes due to the pandemic, happened about, I think, 2.5 years ago now. And the follow-through of that forum is, as we see it, is going into the OECD and creating the Global Forum on Technology. So we talk a bit about that in the strategy as well. And we're really keen to see that fully launched and established at the start of June, so another date for your diary on watching these things. So at the start of June, under the OECD's Ministerial Council meeting, we are looking forward to seeing that forum established and make sure that the international community, so it's OECD plus friends, can make sure that we're on top of the cutting edge of technology. I mean, a huge topic at the moment is all of the governance of AI, and I heard it described yesterday as a technology that's developing at exponential rate with interest across our system developing at an exponential rate. So how on earth we're all keeping up with this is hard to say, but we're really keen to make sure not only that our own domestic approach to AI governance is successful. We've set that out in a white paper. It's all about innovation, but also balancing that with some of the risks that we see in the technology, wanting to make sure that we regulate the applications, but also that we can take a cross-cutting view and make sure that that the system can deal with all of the rapid changes and can test things as we go. So we want to make sure that we get that right at a national level, possible, but also that we have the right fora in place internationally to work out collectively how we're going to govern AI. That could be something that we come back to, but I'll leave it there for now.
No, stick there, because AI is going to be quite important on the upcoming EU-US Trade and Tech Council meeting in, to be honest, in the middle of nowhere in Sweden at the end of May. Tibor, I would love you to spill the beans on what the communique says, but yeah, I presume you're going to say no comment. But just more broadly with the Commission, Dieter mentioned that there's both the Indian Trade and Tech Council event in a couple of weeks here, I believe, and then one with the Americans at the end of May. From the Commission's perspective, it feels like this is sort of part of like the Commission's remit. It's promoting these elements, and as well as the AI trustworthy. There's a trustworthy AI component to the Trade and Tech Council. So how would you pitch the Commission in terms of taking from what the Council says, what the member countries say, and then taking that to your international partners?
So I think that tech indeed has become an area for diplomats, which was not the case a few years ago. I think that we also to Denmark to take the initiative to create this strand of activities, to have also their ambassadors in Silicon Valley also reaching out to the industry over there. But for the Commission, I think that in a way, all this is part of a strategy in our international engagement. I mean, a few years ago, we developed this digital compact until 2030. And basically, in this strategy, we made it clear that you cannot somehow go about the digital transformation if you don't take a global perspective from the outset. Because in a way, there is no division of labor between just doing the EU stuff and doing the international stuff. The two are intrinsically linked, and we want global standards and global governance because otherwise basically will be suboptimal for our companies, for our people. And the risk is really of a battle of models, which is very much at stake today. I mean, it's a battle in terms of technologies, but also a battle in terms of values. So in a way, this bilateral engagement we have established is part of a plan which is to try and work with like-minded countries so that we can promote our common values. And this is, I would just refer to our Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles, which really is the underpinning, in simple words, of what we try to achieve in this digital transformation. And when we work with the Americans, with the Japanese, with the Koreans, even with the Indians, I think the starting point of the conversation is very much these shared values and how we go about it to make an impact in terms of research and technology, in terms of also of standards, in terms of global norms and regulation. It's not always an easy conversation because we come from different perspectives, and there is also, I would say, competition in terms of the economy and the businesses and the companies that in the end can benefit from our efforts. But my impression is that there is real momentum because everybody realizes, there is an issue. And we cannot wait because the technology is so fast that if we don't, come to grip with it, basically we'll go in a direction that will be uncontrollable or that will be simply impossible to take back and put it in the place where we want to be in terms of human rights, in terms of privacy, in terms of making sure that the technology works for people and not the other way around. So I think that's very much what we discussed with the Americans. That's also what we discussed with the Indians. They have, I think, a unique position right now being at the helm of G20, but also being, in earnest, a superpower in terms of ICT. And I think that everybody is waking up to the thousands of engineers there. And I think we can learn also from what they did, for instance, in the area of digital public services, which is really interesting also for the Global South. I think through these bilateral interactions, we hope we can slowly but also rapidly, in terms of momentum, build these common rules and then possibly, have more people joining the conversation, and including the UK.
I don't want to offend any of the diplomats on the panel, but there's a diplomatic language in which we all, at least within the democracies, Western democracies, have a human rights-based approach. We all want to put our best foot forward collectively. And I think, Thibault, your point of the battle of models or values is very on point, particularly when you look at what's happening in China. But then I also look at some of the friction within like-minded countries, be it the way the Americans are approaching AI. Industry-led rules versus the AI Act. Even the British approach on the data strategy being focusing on innovation, whereas maybe the European approach is maybe more again, the UK is protecting privacy, but there's maybe a different focus there. Are we moving too slowly? China is a tech superpower, is an economic superpower. It has a different mode of government than we do that can, rightly or wrongly, move faster and quicker on some of these things. If we're looking to get Western consensus, are we looking to either via the OECD or via bilateral discussions like the TTC, that will take a long time. There's going to be friction because that's how democracy works. But is that fit for purpose when we're trying to come up with global/Western standards that promote our values? Dita, I'm going to put you on the hot spot.
Well, what is the alternative? We can see now with all what we are doing that really is picking up. We are having this conversation. I think on AI there will need to be a faster conversation between all of us because I think we all have this ChatGPT moment where we really say, okay, what is this going to do? What we see a little peak now, but what will it do to our societies in the future? So this just underlines for me the importance of having it in the TTC, the discussions we have in the EU on this. I think there's a better understanding now that this is high politics. And I hope this will help us move faster. Also in the TTC, I think there is a momentum. We all understand it, and we also understand that we need to try to reduce the irritants, because of course we have different systems, and this is how it is. But I think we have some tracks where we can try to reduce this and find common ground. So.
From the UK perspective, we mentioned, I think, the TTC multiple times now, which the UK is not involved in, but you obviously have a lot of expertise both on the diplomatic front and the industry front within the UK. How can you promote the tech international strategy from the British perspective within these fora and move it quickly to mitigate some of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, your point that are we able to move fast enough is something that worries me day in, day out, because obviously the technology does develop fast, and most of our processes aren't as fast as we'd like them to be. But I think, Dita is absolutely right that it has to be within a democratic context. It has to be taking into account an understanding of what people are concerned about around technology, whether that's online safety or privacy. All of these things have to be picked up and taken forward through government action. On the point about is it a series of bilateral conversations between countries or groups of countries? Is it more multilateral through the likes of the OECD? I mean, I think it's a case of building across all of those things and building a broader consensus. So we also have the UK-US tech dialogue that we are able to get into these issues in a lot of depth with the US. Similar sort of dialogue with Australia, got digital partnerships with various countries in the Indo-Pacific. So all of these things pull together, we hope, into a broader multilateral consensus that will help us all move forward. But it's not easy. So all of you support us too.
Yeah. Answers on a piece of paper, please, at the front. Thibault, I'm going to put on my break up my US citizenship here for a little bit, despite my accent, and look at some of the economic interests at play, let alone the diplomatic ones. What we've seen within the TTC repeatedly, even the meeting in December, was that trade-related issues, to a degree, were quite central to those negotiations and overshadowed them to a degree. from the Commission's perspective, how do you allow people to compete on semiconductors, for example, and subsidies that are coming from both sides of the Atlantic, while also promoting sort of shared values around trustworthy AI or, telecom standards or the other legitimate issues that sometimes are conflated with trade but are diplomatic or sort of policy matters rather than just purely economic interests?
I mean, clearly, in a relationship between the EU and US, there is a lot first. I mean, it's the biggest relationship in terms of trade you can have. In terms of trade in goods and services, I think it's 42% of the global trade. So it means it's a vast conversation, and it also means that it's a grown-up conversation. So, of course, we have disagreements. We are competing in some respect. But at the same time, I think that we are strong allies, and especially today in the context of the Ukraine war, in a context where really our democracies are under attack, we put things in perspective as well. And I think the TTC is a new attempt, I would say, to find a kind of an hybrid conversation. When you can be on message in terms of very specific elements like AI standardization, and I would invite you to have a look at the AI roadmap, which I think is really very concrete, and it's about working together to develop global norms and global standards, to elements where we have indeed trade irritants and that we need also to tackle. And I think that the situation with the Inflation Reduction Act was not very much welcome in the EU, but I think we are coming to terms with it. And if you look at proposals, also here in terms of the Clean Tech Act and also what we are generally doing in terms of the Green Deal, there is also subsidies. There is also an attempt for the EU to be a tech leader. What is important, I think, in this conversation is that at the end of the day, we solve problems. And that's very much, I think, what our leadership is committed to. I mean, we will meet now in Luleå at the end of the month. It's really an interesting place because this is where you have clean tech in terms of, steel industry, you have battery around. So it has a strong resonance to these themes. It is also in Sweden a place where you have leadership for, network technologies. And we'll have conversation in terms of what is the future of this technology. Beyond 5G will be a theme we will discuss. So you see that in these conversations, and you mentioned also chips, I think I'm really glad that we have a political deal on the CHIPS Act a few days ago. So really well done to member states and parliament. It was not easy, but I think we have now also a tool to enhance the collaboration with the Americans, to make sure that we complement each other instead of just going into a subsidy war. And I think that's the kind of message that we bring in the conversation, making sure that together, we build a better world using these technologies, taking into consideration our differences. I'm
going to be quite pro-Swedish here. My favourite telecom fact, if that's even a thing, is Bluetooth is named after a Viking king. That's why we call it Bluetooth, which is always fun to break out at parties.
From Denmark.
So Denmark. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Then don't pretend.
First king, so.
There we go. Then there we go. I wanted to maybe look at the UK's role in this, because what I find interesting is that as much as the TTC has been quite useful in terms of the EU-US collaboration, it leaves out Canada, Australia, Japan, and those are conversations, and the UK going on, and those conversations are happening at a bilateral level. But from the UK side, because of the forum you hosted during the G7 presidency and then the move into the OECD, where do you see that sort of intra-transatlantic discussion, which you are part of on both sides, but not in the room? Would the Brits prefer to see those discussions happening within the G7, which they are happening this weekend? Is it a question of all of the above? I mean, because a lot of these things around chip subsidies and trustworthy AI and what happens with 6G standards are very pertinent to your tech strategy and others for Australia and Canada and whoever else.
Well, I think you might have answered your own question,
Yeah.
Mark. So I think it is all of the above, and it keeps us diplomats busy. But obviously, a key role for the G7 in staying on top of the latest developments in the digital sphere. But we do need somewhere, I think, that can where a lot of these discussions can land and have the technocratic impetus to keep on top of them. And I do think OECD has got a strong role to play there. In terms of the bilateral work, I see this as quite innovative as well. So it's things where we can bring, you know, our kind of our latest concerns, our you know, you mentioned irritants, but really just get everything on the table and work out where the two countries, whatever they might be, whether it's UK and US working together or any of the other constellations, where we can get on top of the real nitty gritty as well. So yes, all of the above, and you know, the UK wants to work with all of our partners around the world, and also people that we disagree agree with on things as well. We want to work with all.
I write a weekly newsletter called Digital Bridge, which focuses specifically on the geopolitics of tech. And repeatedly, I come up to this fact where there are some very good collaborations between regions or countries, but inherently the rules are different. The Digital Markets Act is going to be different than the UK's competition bill. The Online Safety Bill is going to be inherently different than what the Australians are doing, because countries are different and cultures are different. So as much as I get the coordination and the values-based approach from everyone on the panel, isn't at some point the internet is a global phenomena, and setting domestic rules is inherent, even regional rules within the EU is inherently limiting, but we don't have a digital UN or any other sort of Western consensus on this. So is that not just a massive failing in terms of creating global rules? Because in terms of, say, telecom standards, the Chinese have a very vested interest, legitimate interest, in pushing their own view when it comes to 6G standards, which is maybe different than a Western view, but it's equally valid because the internet is a neutral place. So, Dieter, from your perspective, like, how do you approach that? How do you set forward the Danish/European approach to this when, in the end, your powers stop at the border and there's no way around that?
I think for us, it's a very important message that, you know, a responsible technological development, it's not for a few Western countries only. It's for all citizens globally. I think I would like to highlight also that both Denmark as a member state, but also EU, we're really supporting the mandate and the mission of the UN Tech Envoy and the Global Digital Compact as a current process where we can discuss some of these things. So this is a very important forum. And now you talk much about, you know, states and national borders, but we really also need to have a good conversation in this to include the industry and the civil society. And what I might also find a bit very inspiring with your really impressive new tech strategy is also that you kind of get a little bit more specific on the different technologies to break it down a little bit. And I think that's also that might also be needed to really get into more details to find the answers to the issues. And I think there are things we can agree on globally in this. Or not, maybe not all of us, but
a consensus at least
on some issues.
Thibault, we have a question which I'm going to point to you, so mostly because it kind of fits into your rubric. I'm going to paraphrase from Nick Rayners, so thank you for your question. In terms of what's going on within the EU, specifically on the AI Act, it's moving quite quickly, and we might have trilogues soon on that. The discussion around the TTC on AI is a different beast because of the dynamics in the US are just different, and they're not going down that route. So how do you balance that sort of regional legitimate AI Act proposals, which are moving quite quickly, with a discussion with a like-minded partner who is taking a very different approach to how to look at this technology? How do you balance those two out?
No, clearly when we develop legislation in the EU, we don't work in complete isolation. You know, very often actually the origin of EU legislation is also because we watch what our member states are doing, and we are also acting when we see the risk for maybe somebody going first and creating new barriers within the single market. That was very much the motivation for our previous agenda, you know, the single market developments, digital single market. And I think that's a little bit the risk globally, that, you know, everybody is doing digital legislations these days. So we need really to watch out that we don't create barriers to trade, barriers to you know, prosperity, because there will be so many versions or nuances of basically the same things in a way that becomes incompatible. So in a way, we are also listening to our international partners, in the US in particular, but not only, when we design our legislation, and when now we are negotiating it until the end. And indeed, as you say, we are very optimistic that the Parliament, the European Parliament, will soon have a position, and we can start trilogues in earnest. This morning I was in a breakfast with the Spanish ambassador, and we were discussing their plans, which are, I think, very ambitious to conclude by the end of the year. So that's, I think, would be a first step, because what we experience in the EU is that our process of lawmaking is extremely transparent, you know, and that's what also the Japanese tell me is great, because they can follow each step, and they can even follow what has changed, you know, on the process. So in a way, it's a tool for everyone to use. And that's what some have called also the Brussels effect, that, you know, you can learn from the EU to do your own stuff. You don't need to copy everything, but it's sometimes a very useful reference point, because we've had many conversations. We have had to discuss also within us between different perspectives. You know, the EU is big enough to have, you know, different positions. So very often when we get consensus in the EU, it is a place that is quite safe to copy, because, you know, it has gone through the motions in a very transparent manner, with also you know, private sector, you know, telling us how we should do it. And that's, in a way, what we see in the US. I mean, I'm really surprised, you know, the last time I've been there, and also talking to NGOs, there is such an appetite for doing legislation like the EU in the United States. At the same time, there is a lot of frustration, because, you know, because of the way it is organized, you know, it's more complicated, you know, because you need to have these bipartisan elements and so on. So, and it's incredibly complex. You know, politics in the US is extremely complex. They don't have, you know, one law that, as we do, that is, you know, moving each time. They have, you know, they can put things everywhere in different pieces and so on. So it's a different beast, and that's why also we need to respect that. Yeah. At the end of the day, what I can tell you is that we see in our conversation in the TTC a lot more convergence that maybe people recognize. I think the problems are the same, and I think that it's probably we need to have nuances because of the lawmaking process, but my hope is very much that we go exactly in the same direction in terms of impact.
I should only, for my business colleagues, I should also say that EU policymaking is transparent if you're a Politico reader, because it can, outsiders, it can be quite difficult. I know we have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to put Dieter and Louise on the spot a little bit in terms of short-term wins to get points on the board. Where do you see international collaboration on digital issues where that we don't need to wait multiple years? There are areas where we can move quickly that can show the benefits to the average, you know, citizen of your countries.
Now I'll take the external perspective on this. I think we can do a lot as a member state in Europe, more actively go out and discuss globally with partners and countries, how can we together use technology for good, very concrete ways, increase global connectivity, concrete solutions who can help citizens, public health systems, businesses around the world. I think we should try to be more proactive in really showing, I think, many good solutions we have to real-life problems. And also, as part of these European solutions that I think we also include that it's responsible. It respects privacy and it's secure. So very much believe in concrete actions, followed also by, pushing our political discussions in all these forums we have discussed. So a little bit on both the very concrete and the higher level.
All right. And Louise, I'm going to give you the final word before we have to end the summit, so no pressure at all. Where do you think there is some easy wins to have?
Oh, it's moved from short-term wins to easy wins.
Well,
gosh. Yeah. Okay. And making it a very difficult question with the word easy in it. So, I mean, I think we obviously need to act as a group of as a global community on AI, and we're as we said, we're all working through our individual approaches, and lots has been made of the differences, but there's a lot of commonalities as well. So, all of our work is based around the OECD principles, and and I think to your point about how does it work if everyone's doing something differently, but we also want to combine efforts. I mean, I think that's part of the natural process. So you work out what you need on a democratic basis, and then it starts to become internationalized, and then that international process might, in due course, impact later stages of your domestic regulation and approach. So I think that's a natural process. I think we need to come together on AI, and I think in working that through, just keeping in mind we probably haven't talked enough about engagement of companies, making sure that all of this is done on that multi-stakeholder basis. So that's really crucial in this sector. And we also haven't talked that much about researchers as well. So this is really cutting edge stuff. So making sure that what we're doing does include businesses, society, civil society, but also the researchers at the cutting edge. That's for me a big approach for the next few months. I also agree that your point on the UN Tech Envoy and making sure that this conversation is relevant to all countries around the world. One thing in our tech strategy is that we're going to be launching a centre of expertise to support developing countries to build expertise around this. So I think keeping in mind that whole global approach as well is really crucial.
And if anyone wants to buy Louise a free cup of coffee in the networking event later to talk about researchers in companies, I think she's sticking around. With that, I think we've come to the end of the Europe Tech Summit. I want to say thank you to Thibault, Leo, Louise and Dieter for a wonderful panel discussion. I really appreciate it. And to those in the audience as well as those online, thank you for participating, which is hopefully been a good day and a half of good discussion. As I said, there was coffee and biscuits, I think, for our networking event outside, so please come join us, and thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Right,
Hi, good to see you again. How are you?
I'm new in this field, so
good.
So it's really.
Was I supposed to? Oh, yeah, sorry. Would you
It's not immediately fitting. Okay. There is also broader part of the stakeholders involved in the afternoon.
Okay.
That's where I could see maybe an opportunity, but I need to check because normally.
Thank you all for joining us for 2 days of questions, comments, and chat about technology and EU policy. We were lucky to have some great interviewees, and particularly enjoyed the fact that we had people from all over Europe and from many different EU institutions. It was great to see MEPs here on the stage debating. And I hope that gives you all a lot of food for thought on policy making and the challenges ahead for Brussels and for beyond. Thank you again for being with us, and hopefully see you again next year. Bye-bye.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
your feet to try.